Welcome to Design and Ignite Your 3.0 Life Vision with Chip Conley. I'm Seth Streeter, the CEO of Mission Wealth. We're excited to share today's program as part of our new Inspired Living service offering. For 20 years, all of us at Mission Wealth have been dedicated to helping our clients optimize their finances and achieve their life goals. While we love diving into portfolios and financial plans, we know that happiness and fulfillment comes from a lot more than just numbers on a balance sheet. Our new Inspired Living service offers dynamic resources and events with noted experts like Chip Conley to assist our clients in living their very best lives while also enjoying financial security. I hope you're all prepared to be inspired today because we're going to reimagine your future with the master of reinventing oneself, Chip Conley. I met Chip 9 years ago in San Francisco after he had just sold his iconic Joie de Vie boutique hotel chain. I became a fan of his best-selling books and loved his blend of creativity, business savvy, and psychology. We connected again in 2017 when we both were speakers at a conference, Chip on the main stage, me on the small stage, but we kept in touch. And most recently, we spent a couple days together this year in Austin, Texas. I am truly grateful to call Chip both a friend and a mentor. Now, rather than go into Chip's impressive bio as a hospitality maverick, best-selling author of 5 books, and pioneer of the world's first midlife wisdom school, I'm going to let Chip share his story in his own words. Today's program will begin with Chip's story of his own transitions over the last decade, and then I'll be posing questions for about 30 minutes, and we will open up the conversation to all of your live questions. So please do post your questions in the Q&A chat box at the bottom of your screen. So to kick us off, I would love to start by taking a poll to find out where you all are with regard to your life transitions. So if you would please answer these questions and just post transitions that you have recently gone through or are currently going through. And I'll give you about 20 seconds. All right, let's see our results. What type of transitions are we going through? Wow, a lot of career changes, retirement, job loss, makes sense. Relocations, empty nest, people having kids becoming independent, significant gains or losses, yes, with the pandemic, death of a family member, a close friend, new parenthood, relocations. So Chip, clearly we have a group that's ready to talk about transitions. So I'm going to pass it over to you. And I just want to thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today.
Thank you, Seth. Really an honor to be doing this with you and your community. And let me just say, welcome to what I hope will be an enlightening, illuminating hour together. You know, we don't get much in the way of training around transitions. No one sort of gives us an operating manual at age 25 and says, here's your life. For me, I remember as a kid playing the game of life, the board game. And it sort of had a linear path. You know, you got in your little car, your car was showed where you were on the map and on the game board. And it was just a linear path and everybody was on the same path. Well, the truth is the true game of life, not the board game, is not a linear path. And it is not all that predictable. And there are all kinds of transitions that happen. And the difference between a change in your life and a transition in your life is pretty fundamental. When a change happens, it tends to be situational or circumstantial. I changed my job. I changed my boss. I changed my husband or wife. But often when you actually ask the same person who made the change 2 or 3 years later about their gripes or grumpiness about one thing or another, they often say the same thing they said about their last boss or their last wife or their last job. And so a change means that the external circumstances have changed. A transition is when it's not circumstantial, it's psychological, and it may even be spiritual. It's something that is a major shift inside of you. So what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to give you a quick story on my transition that I needed to make over the last dozen years or so. And if I'd done just the change alone and not the transition, I probably would have not been able to evolve my life in ways that I was able to do. So let me get into the specifics. And then I'll tell you a little bit about some theory on of happiness, and then we'll open it up to questions. So my story, I started a company when I was 26, the boutique hotel company Joie de Vivre that Seth mentioned, ran it for 24 years. About 22 years into it, it had been a calling for me. I like to think of our work in a pyramid. You either have a job, which is most of us, a career, which is the middle tier, or a calling at the top, at the peak of the pyramid. I wrote a book called Peak, How Great Companies Get Their Mojo from Maslow, and that's in the book. So I had a calling. I was fortunate. It felt like it was the work I was supposed to be doing on this planet. And then for about a year, I started feeling a malaise. I just started feeling something was not right inside of me. I didn't like the work I was doing as much as I used to like. I'd written in my third book, Peak, and I loved that, and it felt like, oh my gosh, that's my new calling. Oh, I have a mistress. I can't tell the people at work, that I have this new thing I like doing more. And then I had a flatline experience. Sometimes we actually have to have circumstances outside of ourselves to wake us up. And for me, I was a hotelier who had a wake-up call. And the wake-up call I had was I had broken my ankle playing baseball, and had a bacterial infection in my leg because there was a cut on my leg. I didn't know that. And then they put me on a strong antibiotic, and I didn't realize I was allergic to the antibiotic. And I was giving a speech, and I went unconscious on stage and then flatline over the course of the next 90 minutes, flatline 9 different times. And I could have died. I was 47 years old, was not a heart attack. We had no idea what it was initially. And what it did, though, is it helped me to ask myself a deeper question. Is the way I live my life today the way I want to live my life the rest of my life? And one of the things I would suggest you might consider is do a little math equation. Ask yourself, how long are you going to live till? And if I was going to live, I'll do the math with you right now. Let's say I was going to live till age 98, which is a number that I've always had in my head because my dad says he's going to live till 98. So what percentage of my adult life was still ahead of me? So if at age 47, I had 29 years of adulthood behind me. So 18, so adulthood starts at 18, plus 29 equals 47, right? Okay, so 47. And then if I was going to live till 98, how many years of adulthood do I have ahead of me? 51 years. So I had 51 divided by 80. So from 18 to 98 is 80 years of adulthood. I had 29 behind me, 51 ahead of me. So I had 51 divided by 80. I had 64%, almost 2/3 of my adult life still ahead of me. And here I was at age 47 lamenting the fact I didn't want to be CEO anymore, but I didn't know how to let go of it. I didn't know how to do the transition because some of it was my identity was defined by that. The flatline experience forced me to say, I need to make this transition in my life. And over the next 2 years, during the Great Recession, which was not an easy time to sell a business, especially in the hospitality business, I was able to get to that place. And I was able to realize that, there are 3 phases in transitions. We'll talk a little bit more, Seth and I'll talk a little bit more about this, but there's the end of something, there's the messy middle, which we'll come back to, and then there's the beginning of something new. If I had not done those first 2 steps of saying I have to end this, and then I'm in this awkward liminal zone, we'll talk about what liminality means in a couple minutes as well, I would never have been open to what emerged for me. And what emerged for me, fascinatingly, was 2 years later, after I sold my company, the 3 young founders of Airbnb who'd created this little tech startup asked me to join them and help them basically steer their rocket ship, which I've been doing for 8 years now, 4 years full-time and then 4 years as a strategic advisor. So that opportunity would never have happened if it hadn't transitioned out of the thing that I thought I was going to do the rest of my life, which is be CEO of my company. So what I want to just finish with is a little bit of some of the elements of what do we know about happiness? Well, happiness is not about being stagnant. There's a beautiful TED talk by Dan Gilbert, Harvard psychologist, talking about your future self. You can Google it. And he basically showed that at age 20 and at age 80 and every age in between, we vastly underestimate how many transitions or change, how much change. I'm going to use the word transition and change interchangeably right now. How much change we are going to have in our life. We underestimate it. We have no idea what's coming ahead. And when I look at the last 10 years, since the time I sold my business, yeah, so much has happened. It's been a fascinating 10 years, probably my favorite 10 years of my life, which brings me to another point, which is a lot of us think that somehow at age 45 or so, it's just all downhill from there. Well, it is a little bit downhill for a couple of years there, because there's something called the U curve of happiness, which shows that the low point on average for the average person, your mileage may vary, the low point of happiness in one's life is about age 47. In fact, it's 47.2. So if you're 47.2 right now, just know it's getting better from that point forward. Yes, from about 45 to 50, it tends to be the low point. Why is that? There's a lot of reasons for it. I'll just say briefly, it's often because there's just too many things happening at once, and it's hard to digest it all. You're the sandwich generation, taking care of your parents and your kids, but a lot of other things. Disappointment equals expectations minus reality. You've at age 45, 47, you sort of know, okay, I can see where my life is going, and you may have had some expectations that are not being met. So your 50s are often happier than their 40s. Absolutely, I agree. I've just entered my 60s. Our 60s are happier than our 50s on average. Our 70s are happier than our 60s on average. And for women, their 80s are actually happier than their 70s on average. So this is interesting. So we actually start losing our happiness in our early 20s. It just keeps going down until about 45 to 50, and then it goes up. So for those of you on the call today who are struggling through something, just know that maybe there is a rainbow out there in the future in a pot of gold. And when I say the pot of gold, it's a figurative pot of gold. I'm not saying it's a bunch of money sitting there, unless you've invested with Seth and his team and they've done a great job for you, which is, I'm sure, the case. But it's more the idea that as we get older, we start appreciating the present moment more. That's a very strange concept, because a lot of us, you don't think of a 75-year-old person as mindful necessarily, maybe full of memories, but are they in the moment, present moment? Yes, they tend to be. Partly because what has been shown at every age, whether it's someone who has AIDS is going to die soon, or any kind of other affliction where they're going to die soon, or later in life, is when you have a shorter life ahead of you, you tend to focus on the present moment more. And when you do that, and you don't just languish in the past and all the memories and the regrets, and you don't get so wrapped up in the future, which is what we tend to do the first half of our adult life, we tend to actually appreciate the moment more than we do the past or the future. In that is where happiness comes from. I went and studied the Gross National Happiness Index in Bhutan and found that, frankly, the thing that actually has made them one of the happiest places on the planet is gratitude. Gratitude is the shortcut to happiness. The thing that actually makes the US less happy than Bhutan and a lot of other places, although still a moderately happy place, is gratification. If you get too focused on gratification, it tends to mean that you're not focusing on the gratitude. So my last thought is happiness equals gratitude divided by gratification. Up the ante on your gratitude. Don't get so focused on the gratification. If you do that well, you're likely to be happier.
That's a wonderful starting point for us today, Chip. Thank you. You mentioned transitions and kind of a framework around the 3 phases of transitions. And I just wanted to touch base a little bit further on that for our audience. Why should we be embracing being a butterfly versus a caterpillar as we think about those 3 transitions?
So thank you for the metaphor. It's a great one. You learned it in elementary school. The iconic journey of the caterpillar to the butterfly. Let's talk about it. So the caterpillar plumps up, gratifies itself a lot, and to a point where it just knows it's actually supposed to make a transition. It's supposed to make a change. It's supposed to actually go through a metamorphosis. So it actually starts to spin its cocoon or its chrysalis, and it goes in there and it gets gooey and it's dark. And in that messy middle, that awkward liminal zone, So liminal is also limbo, to be in limbo, is liminal, to be betwixt and between. That's the liminal zone. It's usually a place where you feel a little bit imbalanced, like not completely comfortable. That's what the caterpillar is in the middle. And if you opened up the cocoon halfway, it's not baked. It's not fully baked. And that could be you in your life in a transition you're going through. On the other side of it, it breaks out of the cocoon as this colorful butterfly who can actually go and fly. So not all transitions have that happy ending, but almost all transitions, if you're open to going through it fully, have that 3-stage piece to it. When a transition goes wrong, often it's because it never gets to the third piece. It means when someone is just not ready to let go of what it's me saying, I can't sell my business even though I want to, and just sticking with that and just hating it. Or it's going into selling the business, but not being willing to look for what's next and getting stuck by lamenting the past, or having your identity. If my identity had still been for the rest of my life the founder and CEO of Joie de Vivre, and that's all I ever cared about, just like we know the high school quarterback who at age 50 just can't talk about anything but the fact that he was the All-American high school quarterback and that he hurt his knee. These are things that if you don't make it to the other side of it, you get stuck in the messy middle. It's like a caterpillar who can't actually get out of the cocoon. So just know, helping yourself by being more conscious and intentional about that process of going through transition, which is part of what we do at the Modern Elder Academy. Seth and I will talk about that later. Help people through to navigate their transitions, especially those in midlife. If you can go through it faster, you get to the other side faster.
Yeah, great. Well, in that transition, we oftentimes think about our lifelong learning that we all go through, but especially at the Modern Elder Academy, you speak about long life learning. You kind of flip that around. So maybe you could speak, Chip, to long life learning. What is it and why is it so important?
So thank you. So lifelong learning is a great thing. And yet at the same time, it could be like, I'm going to go take a pottery class. That's great. Really good. Very important. And could be very enriching. And yet, or I'm going to go learn how to code as a computer programmer. But coding at age 30 and coding at age 70 might be very different. And so there are, I think, issues, thoughts, ways of being that start to become apparent to people in midlife that are not so obvious when you're younger. And so our point of view is this, is that around midlife, you are actually starting to focus more on what is it like to live a long life and how to live a life that's as deep and meaningful as it is long. Whereas when you're younger, you're just making it through your adulthood and you have no idea how long you're going to live. But you start pondering this, in your 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond. And so long life learning is dedicated to the idea of helping people ask the bigger and deeper questions that relate to purpose, wellness, community, legacy, that are not necessarily as relevant to a lot of people when they're younger. And so that's why the Modern Elder Academy is the world's first midlife wisdom school dedicated to long life learning.
Great. Well, let's touch on purpose, because that's a big one for us. And as you said, when we're younger, so much of our purpose and identity is caught up in being parents, spouses, partners in our professional careers. So how do we go about cultivating a purpose beyond that, beyond our careers, beyond our familial roles, especially as we become empty nesters, as people in the survey responded, or especially as we near retirement? What are some tips and tricks for developing that purpose?
So follow the breadcrumbs of your curiosity. So, was it Hansel and Gretel? Who is it? I think it was Hansel and Gretel had the breadcrumbs that were going to help them back maybe to their cottage. Well, breadcrumbs of curiosity allow you to see what in life gives you energy, what in life fascinates you. So you could go back to childhood and ask that question. What was it in childhood that you were curious about, and then everybody said you can't be curious about that because you can't make a living or career out of that, and then but it's still there? Or what was it in early in your career you wish you had spent some more time focusing on? Or what is it that you just, what's the part of the newspaper or part of a magazine that most interests you? Or whose life is a role model for a life you wish you could live? Whose biography is really someone who you admire? These are the kinds of questions that might help you get to, or what are the things that you would do if no one paid you anything, whether it didn't pay you any fame, fortune, or anything, but you would do it because you love it. And maybe you even lose track of time when you're doing it. These are the things that actually will help you to understand the passion and in your life, which also could be the purpose in your life. Um, when you find your purpose, much of the life is about finding, I say the meaning that's been said by Socrates, I think it was, the meaning of life is to find your gift, the purpose of life is to give it away. So what that really means is not just everything I've just said here. It also means, what is it that just you feel like you were put on earth to do and to be? There's a famous Japanese diagram called Ikigai, Ikigai. Do a Google search for it and look at where what it says is, if you can find the thing you love doing and that you're good at, and what the world needs, and what you can get paid for, right in the center bullseye of that is the ultimate purpose for you. And a lot of us don't get to the ultimate purpose, but if you can strive for that, it's worth it. And so if you could ask some of the questions I've asked just now, you may be on your way to finding your purpose. And whether that's within the context of making money from it or not, that's fine. And, having a purpose in a sense of legacy outside of your working career is perfectly fine and really important, because your ultimate legacy might be your kids, and actually how you raise your kids, or how your kids, your adult kids, have a meaningful and happy life.
Yeah, that's great. So, Chip, you've written about the Maslow hierarchy of needs, and you've applied it to business and kind of career advancement. I'd love to kind of put that lens on retirement. And I know you've kind of narrowed it down to 3 different phases, but maybe we could just bit about the 3 different phases you've written about and apply that to retirement and kind of our evolving journey into retirement.
Sure. So let's start with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a little refresher course. So Abraham Maslow, a mid 20th century psychologist, said that we have basic physiological needs, and then we have safety needs. Those are the first 2 levels. The second 2 levels are, we have belonging needs, social and belonging needs. And the 4th level is we have esteem needs, feeling a sense of esteem. And then the 5th level is self-actualization. Now, there's a lot of other versions of this. He had a 6th and 7th level later in his life, but that's what most people know. If you were to distill the wisdom of that 5-level pyramid into 3 key themes, it would be survival, success, and transformation. Survive, succeed, transform. So if we were to apply, and this is what my book Peak is all about. If you were to apply survive, succeed, transform to retirement, or to your process of thinking about how do you care for yourself financially later in life, I think you could say that the survival need is one that many financial advisors work on. In fact, a lot of attention is paid to that. And let's just acknowledge that, frankly, a very small percentage of people 50 and older are well prepared for their retirement in terms of from a financial perspective. So getting the basic right is important. And so part of us, from a retirement or from a sort of financial security perspective, it comes down to, like, what's the minimum you need to earn, later in life to be able to feel comfortable. And let's also recognize that you may live longer, as alluding to my age 98 point earlier. If you're going to live longer, you need to make sure you have a way to pay for that extra retirement. There's a famous Stanford economist named John Chauvin who said, you can't finance a 30-year retirement with a 40-year career. And what he was basically saying, that most people can't do that because it's too much time of retirement. So lots of people are actually thinking about, how do I continue to earn income later in life? as well. Now, the success part of that pyramid might be, how do I have a social life? How do I have community life? How do I have enough additional income to actually put into things that are meaningful to me? I want to go on a cruise. Actually, right now, you probably don't want to go on a cruise, but that lots of older people say, I want to go on a cruise once a year to see some part of the world, or they want to go and travel tends to be a high priority for how money is spent after age 50. But it also could be things occasionally. I want to have a second home or a third home or whatever it is. So the success piece of that pyramid often speaks to social belonging needs, how I connect with community, how I feel, how I go back to school, how I say, hey, I'm going to go back and get a master's at age 55 because I've always wanted to be a psychologist. So, to have enough income at the survival level to be able to do that is important. And then at the top, transformation basically means legacy. It really speaks to this idea of like, what's most important to you and how are you investing in that? Our money is here for a reason. It's a currency. It's a currency for us to use in multiple ways. And so the currency around what's important to you in life and how are you investing in that, whether it's in your children's education, whether it's in a community project that makes your neighborhood better, whether it's in a social cause that it means a lot to you, that you want to support, and how do you want to allocate not just your money, but your time in all three of these categories. And when you actually allocate your time up at the top of the pyramid in transformational ways, not only do you transform other people's lives, but you transform your own. So suggest you consider that as a model for actually thinking about how you want to live your life, maybe post 50 years old.
Thank you, Chip. Putting the lens on you for a second, instead of just thinking about, general theories, what legacy would you say in your life have you not yet fully written? At age 60, what are you still writing as far as your legacy?
It's funny. I would say, let's start with the children piece of it. At age 28, I got a 13-year-old foster son. I chose to become a father to a foster son who is now 45 years old and has a son who is 27 years old. I'm a great grandfather. And so that was part of my life. And that was a difficult part though. Like, having a foster son who grew up in the projects in the inner city, who had a very difficult life, was difficult. He ended up having 3 kids. So I was the grandparent to the 3 kids, and now great grandfather to one of the kids' children, one of the grandkids' children. But I can't say that was a complete experience, because what feels not finished is really having the influence on my son's life, his whole life. I had to deal with a lot of his skeletons in the closet, of how he was brought up. So I have 2 sons now who are 9 and 6, or 8, just about to be 9 and 6. And so part of my legacy is just to actually help them to live a meaningful and happy life, and to be a role model for them, as much as I can be. And that's an interesting thing to do in your 60s. I think the other legacy project that I have is the idea of how do we scale regenerative communities, with the Modern Elder Academy in Baja being the first. And we're in escrow on some land, 2,600 acres in the US, to actually create our second one, so that people can actually regenerate themselves. I would like to replace the idea of retirement communities, which is the word retirement in French. The origins of it in French and Latin mean to withdraw into seclusion, which is like being put out to pasture, which is sort of how we've thought about retirement. You just have a bunch of people who are similarly aged, sort of in a gated community if they're affluent enough, or a nursing home if they're not. So a regenerative community is something very different than that. And it's a regenerative farm, which is a step above sustainability, is regeneration agriculture. A midlife wisdom school, a place where people regenerate their purpose in midlife and beyond. and then housing. So instead of having, just a, a ranch home on the fairway, you have a little village on the farm and in the academic community that we've created. And that is the future to me of people post 45 or 50. Um, but also with families in there, and a farm school, so the kids can actually learn, get their hands dirty, and learn about the earth and about produce, etc. So long story short is, that's really exciting to me. So both of those, the barbells of children in my own life, as well as how do we regenerate a community and individuals through creating almost a bit of a utopian place to live.
I love your vision. Chip, when we did our poll at the beginning of this talk, a lot of people have had changes in relationships. Maybe they've lost a parent, their children have left home, they've gone through a divorce, they've lost a spouse. And when we think about kind of our 3.0 phase of life, this third phase of life, let's talk about relationships. How do we develop new, meaningful relationships, maybe besides living in this regenerative community, which would be one way? But how do we develop those relationships as we've gone through this kind of liminal period and now we're into opening to something new? Maybe you could just touch on that for someone who's wanting to develop those core relationships in their lives and the importance of those relationships.
I mean, it's a hard question to answer without knowing a specific situation for a person, but let me just sort of give you some general thoughts. First of all, when it comes to the ending of relationships, we have some ritualization of this. We have funerals. If literally the end of a relationship is when someone passes away. Thank God for funerals, although we have not been able to have them in the normal way during COVID. And so, let's say it's the end of just a friendship, or it's someone moving away. Your closest friend is moving to a new place. Um, the importance of ritual is essential. And this has been proven in social science research, is that people want to actually understand that they have shifted. And there's a reason why, we talk about a commencement ceremony in high school and you're graduating from something, because you're graduating from childhood. You're commencing adulthood at age 18. And that ritual, which also we didn't get to have in a normal way this year, is really important. So what I would just say is your process of, first of all, thinking about endings, if there are some endings, is how are you ritualizing it? And if you're not able to ritualize it in the way you normally would, how can you come up with a new way of doing that? I'm a big fan of writing something on a piece of paper and contemplating it and thinking about it, sharing it with someone else, and then throwing it in the fire. That's a simple form of ritual. You don't necessarily have to do that with a lot of people. You can even do it by yourself. All right, so that's sort of that piece. Then you move into like, okay, I want to just open up to new relationships, whether it's getting married or having closer relationships with my adult children in my life, or we've moved to a new place and I want to make new friends. Well, I just think from my perspective, the most important thing there is how do you create a life where you can have deep and meaningful conversations. Most of our life is spent in talking about the weather. um, it's a topic that you talk about, when you're meeting someone new, and yet it's the internal weather inside of us that's most interesting. Now, for some of you, you say, I don't want to go there. I don't want to go inside of myself. Well, that's fine. So, you can go and meet new friends and have fine friendships that don't have to go deep. But for those of you who actually do want something, you want to actually sort of graduate into new kinds of friendships, be open to the idea that you're going to hopefully magnetically attract people based upon your questions or repel them. And how can you meet those people? Well, you can meet them in all kinds of ways, but often you meet them sometimes because of friends. Number one thing that's interesting in life is if you have a friend who you really love and admire, and the kind of conversations you have with them is not like the conversations you have with other people, say that to your friend. See if they feel the same way. They may feel the same way, and then you guys are like the oddballs, and that's great. And then you can then conspire together and say, how can we have more friendships like this with others? And you may have other friends, and maybe you have once a month a supper, You have a soul supper, and the Sunday soul supper is a night where you guys come together and you ask deeper questions of each other. Or you might say to that friend, and they may say, you know what, all my friendships are like this one. And then you might say, okay, I want to meet some of your friends. Or you might ask them, how have you been able to curate these friends where you have these deep, meaningful connections? I find that hard. So feel free just to be, when we think at any age as an adult that we're supposed to know it all, we shut ourselves down to the curiosity of being able to learn something new. So just learn something new.
Yeah, that's great. Through our Inspired Living service, we are excited to be facilitating and convening conversation circles and wisdom shares where people can share some of those deep and meaningful conversations. So I agree, it's a great need, and it's something we're excited to be convening. Chip, you've talked before about life in two phases. Phase one is we're accumulating, and phase two, we're editing. As we maybe get through that trough, that 47.2, and we get to the second half of life, what are the things that people typically edit in ways that boost their happiness and fulfillment?
Well, the thing that I think people need to consider is like, what is serving me and what is not serving me? What served you in your 20s or your 30s might not serve you anymore in your 40s. And that could be the identity you have. For me, the identity of being CEO of my company wasn't serving me anymore. It could be the people in your life, friends, family, etc. And when I say serving you, I don't mean that they're like, serving you a meal. I just mean, is this relationship serving both of us often when it comes to human issues? Is a mindset serving you? The mindset, I know we have someone here at the Modern Elder Academy right now who is a high school cheerleader. And I swear the first time I met her, I could see at age 55, she still felt like a high school cheerleader. She had that bubbliness to her. She wore just the right clothes. She said just the right things, but she wasn't willing to go very deep in any of her conversations. And so what has happened over the past, right now have something called sabbatical sessions where people come and stay for 2 weeks or longer. She's now been here for 2 weeks, and then she extended to 4 weeks, and then to 6 weeks. And she's gotten deep. And what I've seen in terms of how she is carrying herself in her clothes and her conversations and just who she is has shifted. And one of the things she did is she went to the fire with me. And one of the things she wrote on her piece of paper is, one of the mindsets I'm letting go of is, I'm no longer a cheerleader. And she meant that not just because she was not going to hold on to trying to look like she was 18 years old anymore, although she was a college cheerleader, high school and college. So maybe at age 22. Instead, it was more like, I'm not here to cheerlead everybody in life and to be the rah-rah, always being bubbly and happy. And I'm here to actually ask deeper questions too. And so part of what you may need to edit is a mindset of how you've seen yourself and how you've seen your personality. It could be your career. I'm bored being an accountant. Well, maybe it's time for you to be an accountant. Maybe you could take that same seed, your accounting skills, and apply it in a new area that you're passionate about. I'm going to be an accountant to a nonprofit that's doing work in the world that I care about. Or maybe it's something completely different. I want to go to coaching school. I want to learn how to become a leadership coach. And I'm going to go from being an accountant to a leadership coach. I know a famous software engineer in Silicon Valley who said, in his 40s, I don't want to be a software engineer anymore. And while he was a software engineer, he started to train in becoming a leadership coach. And he made that transition, and now he's in his 50s, and that's all he does. So it's a process, but it's a process that requires consciousness and intentionality, because the changes don't usually happen on their own unless they are forced upon you.
Right. In my TED Talk, I shared a story of a client who was a corporate attorney who became a high school history teacher and found some improved health and happiness in his marriage. And so we all have the ability to pivot. It's a good reminder. And I think COVID has kind of accelerated that wake-up call for many people who said, wait, I'm tired of commuting as much as I was commuting or traveling. And I like my daily walks with my family. So there's always an opportunity to reimagine. Chip, I have a specific question from someone. He said, I'm going through a midlife transition in my 40s and I can't afford to retire. My fear is I won't teach my young kids grit and the value of the grind if I'm not putting on my suit each day and leading by example. Any advice to how I can overcome this concern about I need to show grit to my kids, but yet that's not what I want to do anymore?
Most kids need to see both grit and grace, not just grit. Grit is important. Grit is, especially in difficult times, you grit your teeth and you get through it. So grit's important, no doubt about it. But grace is important too. And grace, comes from the premise that you don't have to do it by yourself. That there's a softening in you. Grit has a hardening, and grace has a softening. Now, and what I'm saying is meant for men and women. This is not just, this is true for anyone. So what does that mean? How would you make that? What I would say is it means being human with your kids, being open to being honest and transparent about things that you're going through, emotions that you're going through, without scaring them, but also helping them to understand your thinking. If you're in the process of maybe imagining a shift in your life, some transition, um, you could, depending upon their age and their temperament, you could actually help them, and in fact, even ask them to ask you questions. Hey, say you have a daughter who's 14 years old. Her name's uh, uh, Georgina, and you say to Georgina, "Listen, I want you to be my coach. Let's spend an hour together, and I want you to ask me questions that you think are going to be helpful to me. I'll first of all tell you what I'm thinking, and then you give her the opportunity to go into dialogue with you, inquiry with you, to talk about this thing that you're thinking about doing." Now, to me, that is showing a bit of grace, a willingness and a humility to actually bring your children into the fold of how decisions are made by the adults. Now, that isn't always right. Let's be clear. But I do know that often when a couple is actually potentially going through a divorce, actually helping the kids understand the process and what's going on is helps them maybe have less long-term trauma associated with it. Now, if back to your question, if you are not in a position where you can change your job, transition your career, etc., you could, on the side, start giving time and attention to something that ultimately you'd like to do in the future, especially maybe when you're an empty nester and you no longer hopefully have to have as much of a financial um, obligation to your kids. Although, as we all know, the kids, even as adults, sometimes need financial support. Um, but I think actually showing that you have some passion and interest in a new topic that is unrelated to your current career is a great thing for kids to see. Because often extracurricular activities is something that we tell kids that they should do. It helps them get into college, the college of their choice. And yet as adults, our extracurricular activities sometimes just drinking and watching, NFL football. And I don't know. It's often not things that feel like they're as productive as it might be for someone as an adult. So I would just say be that role model for your kids when it comes to your extracurricular activities, and some of those activities might relate to a future career you're going to have.
Right. Chip, we have a number of questions that have come in, so please keep them coming. The question is, how does the idea of being rather than doing fit into all of this, or does it? So let's talk about the being side of the journey instead of just the doing side.
Yeah. So I would say on the pyramid, doing, having, being. Doing, having, being is how I would look at it. Survival is about doing. Success is about having, and transformation is about being. And so let me make that a little less abstract. So there's nothing wrong with doing, and being a human doing. Sometimes we laugh at people who are human doings. I'm a human. I've been a human doing for 60 years. I do a lot. But if you don't have time to reflect, if you don't have time to be somebody and to actually imagine not just your to-do list, but your to-be list. What are the people I want to be? What are the adjectives I want people to use to describe me? Then you are a great robot, you're a great, machine, but maybe not enough of a human. One of the things I used to do with my senior executives that reported to me is I would ask them, what are the 5 adjectives people would use to describe you, the people who work with you? And then I'd say, what do you think they are? And then aspirationally, what do you think you'd like them to be? And then we go out and do a survey of their direct reports and see what they come up with. And often a lot of them are not very good. And they're definitely not the aspirational ones. And then I'll sit down with that same person and say, well, here's what you wanted. Here's what you think you are. Here's what they say you are. Here's what you want to be. Let's talk about what practices you can put in place to be more of that kind of person, that being that you want to be. And so let me use an example. It's like, okay, I want to be someone who's a great recognizer of people. I want people to think of me as a champion of them. And it's like, okay, so what are the practices you can put in place on a daily basis or on a weekly basis to be a champion of others? How are you recognizing people? Maybe twice a day, you have a recognition requirement that you just privately recognize 2 people a day on average, every single day at work. And in so doing, you start to live into the being you want to be. The doing leads to the being. So, but you have to start with actually being intentional about what the being is.
Yes. Okay, we have a couple questions from some younger participants and then from some near retiree participants. So starting with the younger group, the question is, I'm in my 30s in the go-go time of my career. How do I balance a fulfilling personal life without losing my standing at work? So if you went back to your 30-year-old Chip, you were busy, you were growing your hotel, go, go, go. And if someone had said, Chip, hey, you need to have more balance, like how do you do those 2 things when you're in your 30s trying to really drive?
I would say, let's start by saying, are you in the right habitat? A plant grows toward the light, towards what, where it's being, and when it's being properly nurtured. And, if you're in a place where you want to have you want to curate a different kind of life for yourself, but you're in a corporate culture that isn't well suited for that, let's start by saying you may need to transition out of that place and find a different kind of place. But what I would say also is, here's the good news. If you're in your 30s, you're a millennial. Millennials are so much more thoughtful about living a life that is a little bit more curated. And often it's the older people who don't understand the millennials. And the millennials, frankly, have something to teach those of us who are older, because they're saying, I don't want to put all my eggs in one basket. And I don't want to go and work for 15 years in the same company in order to become a vice president. And I want to actually live not the episodic life or the life of the what do we call it? The 3-stage life, the tyranny of this 3-stage life, where you learn to your 20 or 25, you earn to your 65, and then you retire to you die. There's a premise that a lot of millennials talk about, which is called FIRE, financial independence, retire early. And so it's like, I want to go crush it, and then I want to go take 3 years off and have a sabbatical, or 3 months off and have a sabbatical, and then go back and try something new, maybe even go back to school. So my recommendation to you is be very open to curating your life in a way that feels right to you, so you don't have regret later in your life, because you can say, man, I wish I'd spent my 30s doing X, Y, or Z.
Right. Chip, here's a question. I've worked for over 41 years and I'm successful. I can retire financially, but I've worked so long and I don't really have hobbies or ideas of what I would do with all my time. Should I figure it out prior to retirement? Any suggestions? So maybe you can talk about someone who sees retirement on the horizon. They could afford it tomorrow. How do you make that transition? How do you make that leap going forward?
It's a great question, because, it's fascinating. Who would have guessed this 100 years ago? Retirement's a relatively new phenomena in history. It's, 100 years old or so. When people retire, they accelerate their mortality by 2 years. Whoa, what are you talking about? You mean I'm not having to work? I have more time on my hands? Wouldn't you actually have more life ahead of you? No, actually you have less. Why is that? It's because people often lose purpose, wellness, and community. So what they lose it partly because work has been a discipline for them. It has been a structure that, from a wellness perspective, allowed them to stay healthy, and be active. From a community perspective, it was a collection of people they could see every day or a work day, and then purpose perspective, of course, that too. So the frame I would suggest you consider is, in your own life, how could you start to introduce yourself to some structure on all three of these? What is it that gives you a sense of purpose? Is there any nonprofit that you've been involved in? Would you like to mentor people? Are you open to not having to go cold turkey on a Friday, such that you are now working zero on Monday, but instead wean yourself off of it over a 5 to 7 year period? If you're working in a place where they actually say, yeah, you can go from 5 days a week to 3 days a week, do that and start that process. And then, on the wellness side, start developing structure in your life so that you actually feel like when you go away from work, you still have the structure. And the community piece, start building friendships again. Whether there's people in your current life or they're people from a long time ago that you'd like to actually reconnect with. Facebook is a good place to find those people. So I would just say, I would recommend you start doing that before you leave, because if you leave cold turkey, it can be a shock to the system.
Yes. Chip, we have a question about practicing gratitude, because you mentioned that earlier. He said, I've recently been trying this practice more, but do you have any good tips or methods for practicing and developing gratitude in your life?
Well, there's really two schools of thought here. One is to be consistent and regular about it, but it can be somewhat superficial. What I mean by that is, you do a gratitude list daily or weekly, and you just sort of say, what am I grateful for? And you keep it, and it's like a journal, and whether it's weekly or daily, you just keep going, and it just sort of gives you the attitude of gratitude. It puts you in a place where it's top of mind in your life. There's an alternative path that some people prefer, which is to actually go much deeper in what you do with that gratitude. And it's not something you have to do daily or weekly. It might be something you do monthly or quarterly or annually. And instead, approach is, go deep on maybe 5 things you feel a depth of gratitude about. And when I say deep, I mean maybe a page on each of them. And if it's gratitude that you feel towards someone else, then go ahead and express that gratitude. Go out and, if there's something you feel some deep gratitude about around another person, use that 1 page or 2 pages to write a letter to that person, and then deliver it to them. And, whether it's delivering it in person or sending an email, and then doing a follow-up conversation with them. Because actually, to see the effect of your expressing the gratitude is going to mean it's going to give that person an opportunity to give you a gift. Maybe something they feel grateful about with you, or maybe just the fact that they feel appreciated for what you've actually told them, which makes you feel good. So you could go on either approach. For some people, the easier approach is the daily or weekly approach, because it doesn't require as much time. Doing something that's going deeper takes more time, but you're not doing it as often. And if you want to do it both together, you're welcome to do that, but that takes definitely some time.
Yes. Chip, let's talk about the Modern Elder Academy, your vision there, and specifically kind of the trends that you had recognized that were happening in our education system nationally, and how we might create this new midlife kind of a learning movement.
Yeah. Well, what I learned when I joined Airbnb was I was 52. The average age in the company was 26. And gosh, I mean, there were a lot of people who were in midlife in that company who felt lost or invisible. And I think, we live in an era where we're living longer, power is moving younger, and the world is changing faster. And that has a lot of people scratching their head and being bewildered. And so what I really felt was that we don't have much in the way of schools, tools, or rituals, rites of passage for people to actually understand how to repurpose their life and maybe even shift their mindset on aging. So we created the MEA. It's in southern Baja, about 1 hour north of Cabo San Lucas, on a beachfront campus. And we've had 800 people now go through the program from 24 countries, and it's exceptionally popular, a really active alumni program. People think of it almost like their alma mater. It's only a week-long program in normal non-COVID times. During COVID, we shifted to doing something called sabbatical sessions, where people stay a minimum of 2 weeks and sometimes longer, because we just didn't want as much turnover here, and the programming is a lot lighter, so people have some more space to themselves as well. But yeah, that's what MEA is, and a modern elder is basically someone who's as curious as they are wise, because it's not just about wisdom; it's about being constantly curious and constantly open to learning something new.
Yes. Chip, a final kind of closing question on retirement that's coming in. What traps should I avoid when I'm transitioning from my working life into retirement? Are there any traps or kind of top mistakes that you see people making on that journey?
I would say the biggest mistake often made is I'm running away from something as opposed to I'm running to something. So often retirement is there's something I'm really ready to let go of, get rid of, etc., without actually imagining what I'm excited about. What is it that gets me stirred up and excited about that I could be running toward? Because that's when you end up in the void. And in the void, you end up getting bored, you end up losing structure, you end up feeling a little bit listless and lost. And so I think making sure that you have, it's almost like a bucket list. You know, what are the things that you feel like it's time to give attention to and that you're excited by?
Right. Chip, how do you suggest inspiring others? Maybe it's friends, family, who may not be used to going deep. And how do you help them, open up to these deeper questions if they're not the type to go to an Esalen or go to retreats? How do you bridge that?
My family is not deep. They don't love it when Chip goes deep. So I would just start by saying it's all about context. There's times when depth is going to be valuable in the family and you can be that. But there's times when people don't want that, and to actually hit them over the head with it is not the solution because it's not the right timing. So I would just say be a role model for it, but also be very thoughtful about the fact that not everybody wants depth all the time. But also help people to see how much richer and better your life is because of the depth that you have been curating in your life. And on occasion, as a gift, give a present to someone in your family or your friends that is often a book that actually, or even just tell them about a blog or a website that's just a little bit of a thoughtful nudge. And the thoughtful nudge, they can do something with if they want. I write a daily blog called Wisdom Well that's on the Modern Elder Academy website. I have so many people I know who have nudged their friends to say, I want to give you this daily blog, and it's free. But you get an email sent to you if you sign up for it, if you subscribe to it. And this morning email comes in from me with just a little bit of a perspective on aging, wisdom, life, and how to live a better life, happiness, etc.
Yes, I love reading your Wisdom Well, so I'm a big fan, and we will be giving everyone a blog post with a copy of today's recording. So we encourage you to share this with your friends, maybe as a way to bridge some of these conversations. And we'll also be sharing some top takeaways and a link to the Modern Elder Academy so you can sign up for the blog. And just wanted to thank you, Chip, for taking the time. You've inspired us to stay curious, to imagine our future, to rethink about retirement from being this withdrawal mode to this expansion mode, and to just find ways to spark more joy and meaning in our lives, no matter what our ages are. So truly, thank you so much. And thank all of you for joining us for this Inspired Talk. I would love to invite you to attend our next Inspired Talk, which will be on January 27th. It's going to be with Andrew Mellon, who's the author of Unstuff Your Life. And it's the title of the talk is De-Stress Your Mess to Live Your Best Life. So he's an expert at decluttering and organizing and simplifying. So the beginning of the year is a great time to do that. So we put the link there for you to check that out. And we truly thank you for joining us today. And who knows, maybe one day we'll be doing a Mission Wealth 3.0 event down in Todos Santos at the Modern Elder Academy. So I think we'll have a lot of fun together going forward, Chip. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who joined us. And here's to our inspired living. Have a great day.
Thanks, Seth.